In the summer of 1985, the small town of Echo Lake, Minnesota, nestled against the shimmering waters of its namesake lake and surrounded by dense pine forests, buzzed with the familiar rhythms of small-town life. The air carried the scent of fresh-cut grass and pine needles, mingling with the faint aroma of fried dough from the annual county fair. Radios and pickup trucks blared Conway Twitty and Alabama, and kids rode Schwinn bikes down gravel roads, their laughter echoing past the neon glow of Millie's Diner. It was a time when doors stayed unlocked, and the biggest scandal was a missing pie from the church bake sale. But on a humid July night, that innocence shattered when Deputy Sarah Lindstrom, a 28-year-old officer with a bright smile and a fierce sense of duty, vanished during a routine patrol near the Canadian border. Sarah, a lifelong resident of Echo Lake, was the pride of the sheriff's department. Fresh out of the academy, she'd earned respect for her knack for de-escalating bar fights at Rusty's Tavern and her patience with the town's youth. That night, she'd radioed in at 11:17 p.m., reporting a suspicious vehicle near the old sawmill on County Road 12, a crumbling relic from the town's logging heyday. The dispatcher, half asleep, noted her calm tone. Then silence. Her patrol car was found at dawn, parked crookedly on the road shoulder, its driver's door ajar, headlights dimming as the battery died. Her service revolver, holster, and a half-eaten pack of Twizzlers lay on the passenger seat. No blood, no signs of a struggle, just an eerie absence that gripped the town like a cold fog. Theories swirled in the weeks that followed. Some said Sarah had run off with a secret lover, a rumor fueled by a recent breakup with a local mechanic. Others whispered about an accident, perhaps a tumble into the lake's murky depths. A few old-timers, sipping coffee at Millie's, muttered about drug runners crossing the border, a growing concern in the mid-'80s as cocaine trickled into rural America. The sheriff's department, led by the gruff but respected Sheriff Harold Vance, searched the forests and dragged the lake for weeks, finding nothing. By winter, the case was shelved, a cold case that became a ghost story told around campfires. Sarah's parents, Ed and Margaret Lindstrom, clung to hope, placing fresh flowers weekly at a makeshift memorial by the sawmill. 16 years later, in the fall of 2001, Echo Lake had changed. The fair still drew crowds, but the sawmill was a rotting skeleton, and Millie's Diner had swapped its jukebox for a CD player spinning Shania Twain. The world, too, felt heavier. 9/11 had shaken the nation, and even this remote corner of Minnesota felt the ripple of unease. Detective Robert "Bobby" Callahan, now 47, had returned to his hometown after a career in Minneapolis. A former high school football star who'd once tackled Sarah Lindstrom in a playful game of tag at a church picnic, Bobby carried the weight of her disappearance like a stone in his chest. He'd been a rookie deputy in '85, off-duty the night she vanished, and the guilt of not being there gnawed at him. Now a seasoned investigator with a reputation for doggedness, he worked out of the county sheriff's office, his desk cluttered with coffee mugs and case files. On a crisp October morning, Bobby was nursing a black coffee at Millie's when the call came. Earl Thompson, a 62-year-old retired postal worker and avid fisherman, had been poking around the abandoned sawmill, looking for scrap wood to repair his dock. In a rusted storage shed, half buried under a pile of moldy tarps, he found a locked metal box. Inside was a faded leather notebook, its pages yellowed but intact, and a tarnished deputy's badge with Sarah Lindstrom's name etched on it. Earl, a widower who'd known Sarah's parents since grade school, brought the find straight to the sheriff's office, his hands trembling as he handed it over. Bobby's heart raced as he opened the notebook. Sarah's neat handwriting filled the pages, case notes, patrol logs, and something else, cryptic entries about meetings at the mill and watching the border. One page mentioned Vance and trust no one. Bobby's eyes lingered on the name of his old boss, Sheriff Vance, who'd retired in 1990 and died of a heart attack in '95. The badge, scratched but unmistakable, glinted under the fluorescent lights. Bobby felt a chill, not from the autumn air, but from the realization that Sarah's disappearance wasn't an accident or a runaway story. Something darker had taken root in Echo Lake. He drove to the sawmill, the gravel crunching under his Ford Explorer's tires. The air smelled of damp wood and decay, and the lake's surface shimmered in the distance, reflecting the gray sky. The shed where Earl found the box was tucked behind a collapsed conveyor belt, its door hanging off one hinge. Bobby crouched, examining the ground. Nothing but dirt and pine needles, no fresh tracks. The notebook's final entry, dated July 15th, 1985, read, "They know I'm close. If I don't make it, tell Mom and Dad I tried." Bobby's throat tightened. Sarah had been onto something, and it had cost her. Back at the station, Bobby briefed Sheriff Linda Grayson, a no-nonsense woman in her late 50s who'd taken over after years in Duluth. She agreed to reopen the case, assigning Bobby as lead. He spent the evening at Millie's, poring over the notebook under the diner's flickering neon sign. Townsfolk stopped by, offering condolences and half-remembered stories about Sarah. Earl, nursing a root beer, recounted how he'd found the box while tugging at a tarp. "Felt like she was guiding me to it," he said, his voice thick with emotion. As Bobby drove home that night, his headlights caught a flicker of movement on the road, a dark sedan pulling off into the trees. He slowed, his hand instinctively resting on his holster. The sedan was gone by the time he reached the spot, but a single cigarette lay smoldering on the asphalt, its ember glowing like a warning in the dark Minnesota night. The morning after spotting the mysterious sedan, Detective Robert Bobby Callahan woke with a knot in his stomach. The cigarette butt, now sealed in an evidence bag on his kitchen counter, felt like a taunt. Echo Lake, Minnesota, in October 2001, was a town of 3,000 souls, where strangers stuck out like a sore thumb. A car tailing him at midnight wasn't a coincidence. It was a signal that Sarah Lindstrom's reopened case had rattled someone. Bobby sipped his coffee, the bitter taste grounding him as he studied Sarah's notebook again. Her cryptic notes about meetings at the mill, and Vance gnawed at him, pointing to a betrayal that had festered in the town's underbelly for 16 years. At the sheriff's office, Bobby assembled a small team to tackle the case. Deputy Maria Delgado, a sharp 32-year-old with a knack for forensics, had moved to Echo Lake from St. Paul 5 years earlier. Her quick wit and meticulous nature made her Bobby's trusted partner. He also called in Dr. Ellen Carver, a semi-retired forensic pathologist from Duluth, who'd worked the original case in 1985. Ellen, now 63, had a steel-trap memory and a no-nonsense demeanor that matched the town's gritty resolve. The three gathered in a cramped conference room, the walls lined with faded maps of the county and a corkboard pinned with photos of Sarah's abandoned patrol car. Bobby laid out the evidence, the badge, the notebook, and the cigarette butt. Maria examined the butt, noting its brand, Marlboro Reds, common but not smoked by many locals, who preferred cheaper generics. Ellen paged through the notebook, her brow furrowing at Sarah's mention of Sheriff Vance. "Harold was a good man," she said, "but he was cagey about this case. Pushed us to close it fast, said it was a runaway." Bobby's jaw tightened. Vance had mentored him, but the notebook suggested the old sheriff knew more than he'd let on. The team's first move was to revisit the sawmill. The air was crisp, carrying the scent of pine and damp earth as they combed the site. Maria found tire tracks near the shed where Earl Thompson had discovered the box, too recent to be from 1985, too deep for a casual visitor. Bobby crouched, tracing the tread marks with a gloved hand. "Someone's been here recently," he muttered. Ellen, meanwhile, inspected the shed's interior, spotting faint scratches on the lock, as if it had been pried open years ago and resealed. The box itself, now at the station, bore no fingerprints, but its contents screamed cover-up. Sarah's notes mentioned border runs and cash drops, hinting at smuggling, likely drugs, given the 1980s border traffic. Earl Thompson, the retired postal worker who'd found the box, became their next stop. Bobby and Maria visited his modest cabin on the lake's edge, where fishing rods lined the porch and a Hank Williams Jr. record spun softly on a turntable. Earl, wiry and weathered at 62, greeted them with mugs of Folgers. "Never thought I'd be part of a detective story," he said, his eyes crinkling with nervous pride. He recounted finding the box, emphasizing how it was buried under tarps that didn't look touched in years. But when Bobby pressed him about anyone else visiting the sawmill, Earl hesitated. "Saw a truck out there a week before," he admitted. "Black Chevy, no plates. Thought it was kids messing around. Bobby exchanged a glance with Maria. The sedan from last night had been black, too. Back at the station, Bobby dug into the original 1985 investigation files, stored in a dusty box in the basement. The reports were thin, too thin. Witness statements from mill workers were vague, and a tip about a suspicious Canadian was marked unsubstantiated without follow-up. Most damning was a memo from Sheriff Vance ordering the lake drag halted after 10 days, citing budget constraints. Bobby's gut churned. Vance had been a fiscal hawk, but stopping a search for one of his own? It didn't add up. Maria, cross-referencing Sarah's notebook, flagged a name. R. Calhoun. The entry read, Calhoun knows about the mill. Don't trust him. Bobby recognized the name, Roy Calhoun, a county commissioner in the 80s, now a wealthy real estate developer living in a gated estate outside town. Bobby and Maria drove to Calhoun's office, a sleek building that clashed with Echo Lake's rustic charm. Calhoun, now in his late 60s, greeted them with a politician's smile, his silver hair slicked back, his suit reeking of money. He claimed to barely remember Sarah's case, calling it a tragedy, but offering nothing concrete. His eyes, though, lingered on Bobby's notepad, and his fingers tapped nervously when Maria mentioned the sawmill. That old place. Just a ruin, he said, too quickly. Bobby left feeling watched, the hairs on his neck prickling. That evening, Bobby met Earl at Millie's diner to clarify details about the truck he'd seen. The diner was a time capsule, red vinyl booths, a jukebox playing Merle Haggard, and the smell of greasy burgers. Earl, more relaxed with a plate of fries, recalled the truck had a dented fender and a red maple leaf sticker, a detail that screamed Canadian connection. As they talked, Bobby noticed a man in a corner booth, his face shadowed by a baseball cap, staring too long. The man left abruptly, dropping a napkin that Maria, quick on her feet, retrieved. Scribbled on it was a single word. Stop. Back at his Explorer, Bobby's phone rang, a block number. A gravelly voice rasped. Leave the past alone, Callahan, or you'll end up like her. The line went dead. Bobby scanned the dark street, the neon glow of Millie's casting long shadows. A faint engine rumble echoed from the direction of the lake, and his grip tightened on the wheel. Someone was watching, and they weren't subtle about it. The cryptic phone call lingered in Detective Bobby Callahan's mind like a bad song, its warning looping as he drove through the misty dawn of Echo Lake, Minnesota, in October 2001. The pine forests loomed dark and silent, their branches heavy with morning dew, and the lake's glassy surface reflected a sky bruised with clouds. Bobby's Ford Explorer crunched along County Road 12, past the abandoned sawmill where Sarah Lindstrom's badge and notebook had resurfaced after 16 years. The threat, leave the past alone, or you'll end up like her, confirmed what he'd feared. Sarah's disappearance wasn't a fluke. Someone powerful wanted it buried, and Bobby's digging was shaking roots that ran deep. At the sheriff's office, Bobby huddled with his team, Deputy Maria Delgado, whose forensic instincts were sharper than ever, and Dr. Ellen Carver, the forensic pathologist whose memory of 1985 was a goldmine. Maria pinned a map to the corkboard, marking the sawmill, the lake, and the border crossing 10 miles north. Sarah's notes mention border runs and cash drops. Maria said, tapping the map. This screams smuggling, drugs, maybe guns, crossing into Canada. Ellen nodded, her glasses glinting under the fluorescent lights. In 85, cocaine was flooding rural routes. The border was a sieve. Bobby's eyes narrowed at the mention of Roy Calhoun, the county commissioner named in Sarah's notebook. His evasive demeanor yesterday had set off alarms. Bobby's first move was to track down Sarah's family for insight. Her parents, Ed and Margaret Lindstrom, lived in a modest clapboard house on the lake's edge, its porch sagging under years of grief. Margaret, now 70, greeted Bobby with a weary smile, her hands clutching a photo of Sarah in her deputy's uniform. Ed, 72 and frail from a recent stroke, sat by a window, staring at the lake. Over coffee, Margaret shared a memory. Sarah had been nervous in the weeks before she vanished, often staying late at the station. She said she saw something she shouldn't have. Margaret whispered. Mentioned a meeting at the mill, but wouldn't tell us more. Said it was for our safety. Ed's voice, raspy but firm, added. She left a letter. Never showed it to the sheriff. Didn't trust Vance. Margaret retrieved it from a locked drawer, a single page in Sarah's handwriting, dated July 10th, 1985. If I'm gone, look at the mill. Calhoun's dirty. So's the judge. The mention of a judge sent Bobby's pulse racing. Echo Lake's courthouse in the 80s was overseen by Judge Raymond Holt, a stern figure who'd retired in 1992 and now lived in a nursing home in Duluth. Bobby and Maria drove to see him. The 2-hour trip through Pine Forest's soundtracked by a staticky Reba McEntire tape. Holt, 78 and wheelchair-bound, had sharp eyes but a guarded tone. When Bobby mentioned Sarah, Holt's face hardened. Tragic case. Runaway, probably. But when Maria pressed about the sawmill, Holt's hands trembled, and he changed the subject. On the drive back, Bobby connected the dots. Calhoun, a county commissioner with real estate wealth. Vance, a sheriff who'd rushed to close the case. And now Holt, a judge with ties to both. A network was emerging, one tied to the border. Back in Echo Lake, Bobby's team dug into records. Maria uncovered financial discrepancies in county budgets from 1983 to 1985. Large payments to a North Star Consulting, a company that didn't exist. Ellen cross-referenced old case files and found dismissed drug charges from the same period, all linked to arrests near the border. The pattern pointed to a smuggling ring, protected by local power. Sarah's notes about cash drops suggested she'd stumbled onto it. Bobby's gut told him the sawmill was the hub, remote, abandoned, and close to the border. To confirm, Bobby and Maria staked out the sawmill at dusk, the air thick with the scent of pine and rust. Hidden in the trees, they watched for hours, their breath visible in the chilly night. Around 10 p.m., headlights pierced the dark, a black Chevy truck, dented fender, maple leaf sticker. 2 men unloaded crates, their voices low but carrying words like shipment and border. Bobby's camera clicked, capturing grainy images. As the men drove off, Maria whispered, "That's no fishing trip." They crept to the spot, finding scuff marks, but no crates, moved too fast. The breakthrough came the next day when Earl Thompson, the retired postal worker who'd found Sarah's badge, called Bobby. "Found something else," he said, voice shaky. At his cabin, Earl showed them a rusted key, tucked inside a tackle box he'd pulled from the lake while fishing. "It was near the mill's old dock," he said. The key, small and ornate, didn't match the lockbox but looked like it belonged to a safe. Bobby's mind raced. Sarah's notebook mentioned a lock stash at the mill. Was this the key? That night, Bobby returned to his small apartment above Millie's diner, the jukebox below crooning George Strait. He spread out the evidence. Sarah's letter, the key, the budget records. The pieces were falling into place, but the puzzle was bigger than he'd imagined. A smuggling ring, protected by Calhoun, Vance, and maybe Holt, with the sawmill as their base. As he locked the door, a crash shattered the silence. Glass littered the floor. Someone had thrown a brick through his window, wrapped in a note. Last warning. Bobby's heart pounded as he scanned the street below, the neon glow of Millie's casting shadows that seemed to move. Someone was closing in, and they weren't playing games anymore. The brick through Detective Bobby Callahan's window left a jagged hole in both the glass and his sense of safety. In the dim light of his apartment above Millie's diner, the note's words, "Last warning," stared up from the floor, scrawled in red ink that looked like blood. Echo Lake, Minnesota, in October 2001, felt like a town holding its breath. The air carried the crisp bite of autumn, mixed with the faint diesel scent from trucks rumbling toward the Canadian border. Bobby swept up the glass, his hands steady but his mind racing. Sarah Lindstrom's disappearance in 1985 wasn't just a cold case. It was a live wire, and he grabbed it with both hands. By morning, Bobby was back at the sheriff's office, the brick and note bagged as evidence. Deputy Maria Delgado's eyes widened when she saw it. "They're scared," she said, her voice low. "We're close." Dr. Ellen Carver, the forensic pathologist, studied the note, noting the ink's cheap quality, likely from a dollar store pen. "Amateurs don't throw bricks," she said. "This is someone with something to lose." Bobby nodded, his jaw tight. The key Earl Thompson found in the lake, Sarah's notebook naming Roy Calhoun and a judge, and the black Chevy truck at the sawmill all pointed to a smuggling ring protected by powerful locals. But the brick meant they were running out of time. Bobby's team zeroed in on the key. Its ornate design suggested an older safe, possibly from the sawmill's operational days. They returned to the site, the pine forest cloaking them in shadow as the lake shimmered under a gray sky. The mill's interior was a maze of rusted machinery and rotting beams, the air heavy with mildew. Maria, armed with a flashlight, found a hidden room behind a collapsed conveyor, a manager's office, its door half buried in debris. Inside, a rusted safe sat in the corner, its lock matching the key's shape. Bobby's heart pounded as he turned it. The door creaked open, revealing a ledger and a stack of Polaroids. The ledger listed dates, amounts, and initials, cash transactions from 1983 to 1985, coded with RC, Roy Calhoun, and JH, Judge Holt. The Polaroids were chilling. Sarah Lindstrom alive, standing in a dark room with two men, one holding a gun. Her face was bruised, her deputy's uniform torn. The timestamp read July 16, 1985, the day after her last notebook entry. Bobby's breath caught. Sarah hadn't run away or drowned. She'd been taken. But the final Polaroid twisted the knife. Sarah, in civilian clothes, handing a package to a man in a Canadian Border Patrol uniform, dated August 1985. Was she coerced? Had she turned? The revelation hit Bobby like a punch. He'd known Sarah since they were kids, her laugh echoing at church picnics, her stubborn resolve shining in the sheriff's department. The idea that she might have been complicit shook him. Maria, sensing his unease, said, "If she was involved, it wasn't by choice. Look at her face in those photos. She's terrified." Ellen agreed, pointing out the bruises. "She was leverage, Bobby. They used her to keep the operation running." Back at the station, Bobby faced a new conflict. Sheriff Linda Grayson called him into her office, her face grim. "County's breathing down my neck," she said. "Calhoun's got friends on the board. They're pushing to shut this down, saying it's a waste of resources." Bobby's fists clenched. "They're covering their tracks." Linda sighed, her loyalty torn. "I trust you, Bobby, but I can't ignore the pressure. Give me hard evidence, or we're done." The threat of losing the case fueled Bobby's resolve, but Maria's next discovery added urgency. A background check on the black Chevy truck's owner traced it to a shell company in Winnipeg, linked to a known drug cartel operating across the border in the 80s. Bobby decided to confront Roy Calhoun again, this time at his estate. The sprawling property, guarded by a wrought iron gate, reeked of new money, far more than a county commissioner should have had in the 80s. Calhoun met them in a mahogany-paneled study, his charm thinner now. "You're fishing, Callahan," he said, sipping scotch. Sarah was a troubled girl, probably got mixed up with the wrong crowd. When Bobby showed him a Polaroid, carefully concealing Sarah's image, Calhoun's face paled, his glass trembling. "I don't know anything about that," he stammered, but his eyes darted to a locked desk drawer. Bobby left, certain the drawer held answers. That night, Bobby visited Sarah's parents, Ed and Margaret Lindstrom, to share the Polaroids, withholding the one suggesting Sarah's complicity. Margaret clutched the photos, tears streaming. "She was alive," she whispered. Ed, frail but fierce, gripped Bobby's arm. "Find who did this. For her." Their pain steeled Bobby's resolve, but as he left their house, headlights flashed in his rearview mirror, a black sedan, tailing him again. He floored the gas, weaving through backroads, but the sedan kept pace, its driver a shadow. Near the lake, Bobby pulled a risky U-turn, forcing the sedan to swerve into a ditch. By the time he doubled back, it was gone, but a license plate left in the mud traced to a rental agency in Duluth, paid for in cash. The next morning, Bobby's team regrouped. Maria had cracked the ledger's code. The initials matched Calhoun, Holt, and a third figure, PM. Likely Paul Mercer, a deputy under Vance in 85, now a private security consultant. Ellen uncovered a sealed coroner's report from 1986, misfiled as an unrelated death, a John Doe, found in the lake, with a bullet wound and signs of torture. The report was signed by Judge Holt, dismissing it as a transient overdose. Bobby's blood ran cold. Was this a witness Sarah had tried to protect? Or worse, was it tied to her fate? As Bobby prepared to search Calhoun's estate for the desk drawer's contents, Maria burst in, holding a fax from a Canadian mounted contact. It detailed a 1985 drug bust near the border, halted when a female informant vanished. The description matched Sarah. Bobby's world tilted. Had Sarah been forced to work for the cartel? Or had she been playing both sides, trying to bring them down? Before he could process it, his radio crackled. Earl Thompson's cabin was on fire, flames licking the night sky. Bobby raced to the scene, the smell of smoke thick as he arrived. Earl was safe, shaken but unharmed, claiming he'd seen a man with a gas can near his dock. In the ashes, Bobby found a singed maple leaf sticker, the same as the truck's. The cartel was closing in, and Bobby was their next target. The acrid smell of smoke clung to Detective Bobby Callahan's jacket as he stood outside Earl Thompson's smoldering cabin. The October 2001 night alive with the crackle of flames and the wail of sirens. Echo Lake, Minnesota, felt like a town under siege, its pine forests and shimmering lake hiding a darkness that had festered since Sarah Lindstrom's disappearance in 1985. The singed maple leaf sticker found in the ashes linked the fire to the black Chevy truck, and the Canadian drug cartel Bobby's team had uncovered Sarah's notebook, the Polaroid showing her bruised but alive, and the ledger from the sawmill safe pointed to a smuggling ring protected by local power. Roy Calhoun, Judge Raymond Holt, and Paul Mercer, a former deputy-turned-security consultant. The fire at Earl's cabin was no accident. It was a message, and Bobby was running out of time to decode it. At the sheriff's office, Bobby rallied his team. Deputy Maria Delgado, her forensic mind racing, and Dr. Ellen Carver, whose knowledge of the 1985 case was invaluable. Maria's latest find, a rental agency receipt tying the black sedan that tailed Bobby to a Winnipeg address, confirmed the cartel's reach across the border. Ellen cross-checked the John Doe coroner's report from 1986, revealing dental records that didn't match any transient but closely resembled a missing Canadian smuggler from the 80s. Sarah was onto them, Ellen said, her voice grim. They killed to keep her quiet, or forced her to play along. The Polaroid of Sarah handing a package to a Canadian border agent haunted Bobby. Had she been coerced, or had she crossed a line? Bobby's plan was risky. Raid Roy Calhoun's estate to secure the contents of his locked desk drawer, which he suspected held evidence tying Calhoun to the cartel. Sheriff Linda Grayson, under pressure from the county board, gave a reluctant green light, but warned, "One misstep, Bobby, and they'll bury this case again." With a warrant secured, Bobby, Maria, and a small tactical team moved at dawn, the lake's mist cloaking their approach. Calhoun's estate loomed, its manicured lawns a stark contrast to Echo Lake's gritty heart. The air smelled of wet grass and money as they breached the gate. Inside, Calhoun was waiting, his silver hair disheveled, his scotch glass empty. "You've got nothing," he spat, but his eyes betrayed panic as Maria beelined for the study. The locked drawer yielded to a crowbar, revealing a stash of cash, a burner phone, and a ledger mirroring the one from the sawmill, names, dates, and payments to JH and PM. A hidden compartment held a cassette tape labeled SL, July 85. Bobby's hands trembled as he pocketed it. Calhoun lunged, shouting, "You're dead, Callahan!" But the tactical team restrained him. As they escorted him out, Bobby noticed a photo on the wall. Calhoun, Holt, and Mercer at a 1980s county fair, smiling with Sheriff Vance. The network was real, and Sarah had paid the price. Back at the station, Bobby played the cassette on an old boombox, the hiss of tape filling the room. Sarah's voice, strained but clear, crackled through. "This is Deputy Lindstrom, July 16th, 1985. I'm at the sawmill. Calhoun's running drugs with Mercer. Holt's taking bribes to bury cases. They know I'm onto them. If you find this, get to the feds." A scuffle followed, then silence. Maria's eyes glistened. She was trying to blow the whistle. Ellen's face hardened. They took her to shut her up. The tape confirmed Sarah's bravery but left her fate unclear, alive, dead, or turned. Bobby's next move was to confront Paul Mercer, whose security firm operated out of a nondescript office in Duluth. Maria's research uncovered Mercer's ties to a Canadian shell company linked to the cartel. They drove to Duluth, the lake's wind howling through the pines. Mercer, a wiry man in his 50s with cold eyes, denied everything, but his desk held a burner phone matching the one from Calhoun's drawer. When Bobby played Sarah's tape, Mercer's facade cracked. "You don't know what you're up against," he hissed. "Walk away." Bobby leaned in. "Where's Sarah?" Mercer's silence was answer enough, he knew. The confrontation escalated when Maria got a tip from her Canadian mounted contact. A cartel safe house near the border, active in the 80s, was rumored to hold records. Bobby's team, joined by 2 federal agents, raided the site, a dilapidated cabin 10 miles north of Echo Lake. The air reeked of damp wood and gasoline as they breached the door, finding crates of ledgers and drug paraphernalia. A locked room in the basement held a grim discovery: a skeleton, female, with a deputy's badge nearby. Ellen, on site, estimated the remains at 15 to 16 years old. Dental records would take days, but Bobby's gut screamed it was Sarah. The badge was hers, scratched but unmistakable. As the team processed the scene, gunfire erupted. Cartel enforcers, tipped off, ambushed the raid. Bobby and Maria took cover behind crates, returning fire as the feds secured the evidence. One enforcer, wounded, dropped a wallet with a Winnipeg address, the same as the sedan's rental. The firefight ended with 2 arrests, but the cost was high. A federal agent was grazed, and Bobby's arm bled from a stray bullet. As paramedics patched him up, Maria found a hidden ledger page in the safe house, a list of payoffs to SL in August 1985. Had Sarah been paid to stay silent, or was it a setup to discredit her? Back in Echo Lake, Bobby faced Sarah's parents, Ed and Margaret, at their home. The lake reflected a blood-red sunset as he shared the news of the remains, withholding the payoff list until the truth was clear. Margaret collapsed, sobbing, while Ed gripped her hand, his eyes hollow. "Find who did this," he whispered. Bobby nodded, the weight of their grief fueling him. The raid had exposed the cartel's reach and Calhoun's role, but Mercer and Holt was still free, and the truth about Sarah teetered on a knife's edge. As Bobby left, his radio crackled. Mercer had fled town, and a witness claimed to have seen a woman matching Sarah's description in Winnipeg, alive, in 1986. The case wasn't over, and the danger was far from gone. The discovery of the skeleton in the cartel's safe house near the Canadian border left Detective Bobby Callahan hollowed out, the weight of Sarah Lindstrom's likely death pressing against his chest. Echo Lake, Minnesota, in November 2001, was cloaked in early snow, the lake's surface frozen, reflecting the gray sky like a cracked mirror. The air smelled of wood smoke and pine, a reminder of the town's quiet resilience. But the scars of Sarah's case ran deep. Bobby's arm, bandaged from the raid's gunfire, ached as he sat in the sheriff's office, staring at the evidence: Sarah's badge, her notebook, the cassette tape, and the ledger listing payoffs to SL, the possibility that Sarah had been alive in 1986, as a witness claimed, clashed with the remains, leaving Bobby torn between hope and dread. Deputy Maria Delgado and Dr. Ellen Carver worked tirelessly to tie up loose ends. Dental records confirmed the skeleton was Sarah's. Her death dated to late 1985, likely from a gunshot wound. The ledger's SL payments were a ruse, Ellen deduced, forged to discredit Sarah if her whistleblowing surfaced. The cassette tape, with Sarah's voice exposing Roy Calhoun, Judge Raymond Holt, and Paul Mercer, was the linchpin. Bobby's team, backed by federal agents, moved to dismantle the smuggling ring that had corrupted Echo Lake for decades. Paul Mercer, the former deputy who'd fled to Duluth, was tracked to a motel in Winnipeg. Bobby and Maria, with Canadian Mounties, arrested him in a tense dawn raid. Mercer, cornered, confessed. Sarah had uncovered the cartel's drug pipeline through the sawmill, facilitated by Calhoun's real estate deals and Holt's judicial cover-ups. When she refused to stay silent, Mercer lured her to the mill under the pretense of a sting. There, cartel enforcers took her, and Mercer, under orders from Calhoun, helped stage her disappearance. "I didn't pull the trigger," he muttered, eyes downcast. "But I didn't stop them." The confession implicated Judge Holt, who'd buried evidence to protect the operation. Bobby's team raided Holt's Duluth nursing home, seizing records hidden in his room, bank statements tying him to the cartel's Winnipeg Shell Company. Holt, frail but defiant, admitted to taking bribes but claimed he never knew Sarah's fate. "I kept the town safe," he rasped, unconvincing. Calhoun, already in custody, crumbled under the evidence, pleading guilty to avoid a federal trial. The cartel's local arm was dismantled, with 6 enforcers arrested and shipments seized at the border. The county board, shamed by the exposure, implemented anti-corruption audits, and Sheriff Linda Grayson pushed for a state task force to review cold cases tied to the ring. The emotional toll came next. Bobby drove to Ed and Margaret Lindstrom's home, the lake's ice glinting under a pale sun. He sat with them in their living room, the smell of fresh coffee mixing with the faint lavender of Margaret's perfume. Showing them Sarah's badge and cassette, he explained her bravery. She'd died trying to expose the truth. Margaret clutched the badge, tears falling, while Ed's frail hand squeezed hers. "She was our hero," he said, voice breaking. Bobby arranged for Sarah's remains to be released, and the town planned a memorial service at the lakeside church, where Sarah had once sung in the choir. The service was a quiet affair, the pews packed with townsfolk, the organ playing Amazing Grace. Earl Thompson, the retired postal worker who'd found Sarah's badge, stood tall, his fishing cap in hand, as he shared how her memory had guided him to the truth. Pastor John, a local fixture, spoke of justice and healing, his words resonating with the 55 and older crowd who remembered Sarah's smile at Millie's Diner. A plaque was unveiled by the lake, inscribed, "Deputy Sarah Lindstrom, 1957 to 1985, Guardian of Echo Lake." The crowd lingered, sharing stories of 1980s fairs and Sarah's kindness, the jukebox tunes of Alabama and George Jones echoing in their memories. Bobby faced his own reckoning. The case had cost him sleepless nights and a bullet graze, but it also restored his faith in the town he'd left behind. At Millie's Diner, over a plate of meatloaf, Maria toasted him with a root beer. "You did right by her, Bobby." Ellen, joining them, added, "And by this town." The neon sign buzzed, casting a warm glow over the vinyl booths, a nod to the past they'd reclaimed. Epilogue, 2010. 9 years later, Echo Lake had healed, though its scars remained. The sawmill was razed, replaced by a community park where kids played under the pines. Bobby, now 56, had retired as detective but stayed on as a consultant, training deputies in anti-corruption protocols. The county's task force, spurred by Sarah's case, had reopened a dozen cold cases, exposing more cartel ties. A foundation in Sarah's name funded scholarships for local youth, her legacy living on in the faces of graduates who'd never known her. Bobby stood by the lake on a crisp fall morning, the air sharp with pine and memory. The plaque gleamed, flowers fresh at its base. Margaret, now 79, still visited weekly, though Ed had passed in 2007. Bobby's thoughts drifted to 1985, to Sarah's laugh at a church picnic, her determination to do right. He'd kept his promise to her parents, to the town. As he walked back to his truck, a radio in a passing car played Merle Haggard's My Favorite Memory, and Bobby smiled. Echo Lake was whole again, its echoes finally at peace. The snow fell softly on Echo Lake, Minnesota, in November 2001, blanketing the town in a hush that felt both mournful and cleansing. Detective Bobby Callahan stood outside the smoldering ruins of Earl Thompson's cabin, the air thick with the scent of charred wood and pine. The fire, set by cartel enforcers, was a final desperate act to silence the truth about Deputy Sarah Lindstrom's disappearance in 1985. Bobby's arm, bandaged from a bullet grazed during the safe house raid, throbbed, but his resolve burned brighter. The skeleton found in the cartel's border hideout, clutching Sarah's badge, confirmed her death. Her cassette tape, ledger, and Polaroids exposed a smuggling ring led by Roy Calhoun, Judge Raymond Holt, and Paul Mercer, a corrupt network that had poisoned Echo Lake for decades. Now, Bobby faced the task of bringing justice and closure to a town that had waited 16 years. In the sheriff's office, Bobby, Deputy Maria Delgado, and Dr. Ellen Carver pored over the evidence. Maria, 32. Her dark hair pulled back. Cross-referenced the safe house ledger with Mercer's confession, obtained after his arrest in Winnipeg. Mercer admitted luring Sarah to the sawmill under false pretenses, where cartel enforcers ambushed her. She'd been killed for refusing to join their operation, her body hidden to preserve the cover-up. The SL payments in the ledger were a fabrication, meant to smear her if the truth surfaced. Ellen, 63, her glasses perched on her nose, confirmed the skeleton's identity through dental records. Sarah, shot in 1985, age 28. She was a hero, Ellen said, her voice steady. Bobby nodded, his throat tight, picturing Sarah's laugh from their childhood picnics. The final arrests came swiftly. Federal agents, armed with the ledger and Sarah's tape, raided Judge Holt's Duluth nursing home. Holt, 78, frail but sharp, confessed to dismissing drug cases for bribes, claiming he protected the town's economy. His excuses rang hollow as agents seized bank records linking him to the cartel's Winnipeg Shell Company. Roy Calhoun, already in custody, faced charges of racketeering and murder conspiracy. His estate, once a symbol of untouchable wealth, was searched, revealing offshore accounts tied to the smuggling ring. The county board, humiliated by the scandal, agreed to fund a state task force to audit past cases, ensuring no other cover-ups lingered. Sheriff Linda Grayson, 58, pushed for whistleblower protections, her voice firm at a council meeting. No one else dies like Sarah. Bobby's heart lay with Sarah's parents, Ed and Margaret Lindstrom. He drove to their lakeside home, the snow crunching under his Ford Explorer's tires. The lake, frozen and glinting under a pale sun, mirrored their grief. Inside, the smell of coffee and lavender filled the air as Margaret, 71, clutched Sarah's badge, tears streaming. Ed, 72, weakened by a stroke, gripped her hand, his eyes hollow. Bobby shared the truth. Sarah had died a hero, trying to expose the cartel. He played her cassette, her voice steady despite the fear. If you find this, get it to the feds. Margaret sobbed. She was always so brave. Ed whispered, make them pay, Bobby. Bobby promised, arranging for Sarah's remains to be released for a proper burial. The memorial service was held at the lakeside church, its steeple framed against the snowy pines. Townsfolk filled the pews, their breath visible in the cold. Earl Thompson, 62, stood tall, his fishing cap in hand, sharing how finding Sarah's badge had changed him. She gave me purpose, he said, his voice cracking. Pastor John spoke of justice and healing, his words resonating with the older crowd, who remembered Sarah's kindness at Millie's Diner. A plaque was unveiled by the lake. Deputy Sarah Lindstrom, 1957 to 1985, guardian of Echo Lake. The organ played Amazing Grace, and Margaret laid flowers, her face a mix of sorrow and peace. Bobby watched, feeling the weight of 16 years lift, replaced by a quiet pride. The aftermath rippled through Echo Lake. The task force uncovered 3 more cold cases tied to the cartel, leading to additional arrests. A foundation in Sarah's name was established, funded by seized cartel assets, offering scholarships to local youth. Millie's Diner became a gathering spot for healing, its jukebox spinning George Strait and Reba McEntire, the neon glow a beacon of nostalgia. Bobby, Maria, and Ellen met there one evening, sharing meatloaf and root beer. We did it, Maria said, her smile weary but genuine. Ellen raised her glass. To Sarah. Bobby nodded, the diner's warmth wrapping around him like a memory of 1985. Epilogue, 2012. 11 years later, Echo Lake had transformed. The sawmill's ruins were gone, replaced by a community park where kids laughed under towering pines. Bobby, now 58, had retired from detective work but taught ethics at the Sheriff's Academy. His hair grayer, but his resolve intact. The Sarah Lindstrom Foundation had sent dozens of kids to college, their faces a living legacy. Margaret, 80, still visited the lake's plaque weekly, though it had passed in 2008. On a crisp fall day, Bobby stood by the plaque, the lake shimmering gold. A radio in a passing car played Merle Haggard's My Favorite Memory, and he smiled. Sarah's echo had reshaped the town, proving that justice, though delayed, could heal even the deepest wounds.